I'm an American by choice, having become a citizen in 2002. I was born in the northeast of England, in the same region that George Washington's ancestors came from. Both my region and my family have deep ties to the United States. I can say with confidence that this country has offered me opportunities I never would have had in England. I grew up poor, with a very distinctive working-class accent. In England, in the 1980s and 1990s, this would have impeded my professional advancement. This background has never set me back in America.
Then White House advisor and top Russia aide at the White House, Dr. Fiona Hill, testifying in 2019 before the House Intelligence Committee as part of the impeachment inquiry of then-President Donald Trump. She recounts her personal story in her new book entitled There Is Nothing for You Here, Finding Opportunity in the 21st Century. And the National Security Council's former senior director for Europe and Russia joins us now. And there are many links around this round table. Yeah. Dr. Hill, Fiona, Richard was your boss.
That's right.
And my father mentored you on one of your books, your book about Siberia.
Yes.
What was his advice?
Well, his advice was don't end up in Siberia.
Okay.
But, yeah.
Well, you're not. You're here on Morning Joe. I can hear my dad saying that, can't you, Joe? I mean,
I was afraid she was going to say when he gave her advice on Siberia, and you said what advice, that he would say, kill them. Killed them all, like a Bond villain. But I'm glad this seemed a little bit lighter.
Just a tiny bit.
Yeah, he does have a good sense of humor.
So, Richard, she worked for you, and now she's, quite frankly, the center of the storm over the past several years. You take the first question for Dr.
I just want to say, the way we met is I did a search over 20 years ago for the best emerging Russia expert in the United States. We looked at everybody. Fiona ended up getting the job.
I was riveted by your testimony. It was pretty incredible.
So I want to talk about the administration you most recently worked for, the Trump administration, which is the question being, when I look at their policy, there seemed to be a difference between what President Trump was often advocating, his personal relationship with President Putin, and the administration policy, because the Biden administration and the Trump administration don't seem that far apart, whereas Mr. Trump seems quite far apart from his own administration. Am I getting something wrong here or not?
No, you're not really getting anything wrong at all, Richard, as usual. And I first want to say thank you for giving me the opportunity to have my first big job in Washington, D.C. But, you know, as you well know, and everybody knows, there's a lot of continuity in U.S. foreign policy. And so, you know, from one administration to the next, you do see the same kind of patterns. But for Trump, his fixation was on Putin. It wasn't on Russia. It was on Putin himself. It's what he saw in Putin that he saw many qualities that he wanted to have himself.
Wow. Joe.
Yeah, it's interesting about that, about Donald Trump's relationship with Vladimir Putin, and yet Congress continually pushed him toward a hard line. I think it's pretty ironic right now that Ted Cruz is causing chaos in the State Department and really stopping this government from functioning effectively. But he's doing it because actually Joe Biden lifted sanctions that would have stopped a pipeline that's in Vladimir Putin's best interest.
Well, that's right. During the Trump administration, the fixation on that pipeline was more on Germany, you know, one of America's closest allies, because the pipeline's going from Russia to Germany, bringing natural gas. And President Trump was just pretty angry with the Germans that in the first instance that they would purchase gas from Russia.
I wonder your thoughts on Biden's moves on that briefly, only because obviously Germany has been such a good ally of the United States, especially West Germany during the Cold War, really about as close an ally as we had. I'm wondering, do you think the Biden administration was trying to do a make good after 4 years of very frosty relations between Washington and Berlin to try to take those sanctions off as a measure of good faith from this country towards Merkel and Germany?
Well, I think there was certainly a strong element of that. I think it was also recognizing a fait accompli, because by the time President Biden came into the office, this pipeline was pretty much finished. It had already been delayed for years by, you know, various other European countries finding all kinds of excuses to hold it up. But, you know, we've been opposing pipelines coming from what was then the Soviet Union to Europe since the 1960s. And the fact that each one of these pipelines has been built since that period onwards, 70s, 80s, and more contemporary pipelines, just shows that we have limited impact on these kinds of decisions.
Let me ask you one final question about the pipeline. Obviously, it's having an impact on us being able to get people into the State Department. Do you think the Biden administration made a mistake? Should they have kept the sanctions on the pipeline?
Well, again, I mean, those sanctions were going to be affecting some of our closest allies. This is part of a problem that we have in managing these sanctions. There's always collateral damage. There's kind of secondary sanctions that get applied, usually to allies. We have to do everything in coordination. So it's a very difficult thing to actually manage. I think the problem is it's a distraction, the whole pipeline right now. And we do need to have as many people in place as we possibly can to actually manage, what's a very difficult set of foreign relations at this period.
There's so many of us, I'll just include myself in this, that are Anglophiles. We absolutely love Britain, love everything about it. So it's always interesting to me when I romanticize Britain, when I talk to somebody like Roger Bennett, who comes on our show and talks about English Premier football. And Roger tells me that as much as he loved growing up in Britain, that he says still, after all these years, every time his plane lands at JFK, he said, I just feel a sense of energy and possibility that anything is possible in this country, because I still believe the roads are paved with gold here. And he just says he feels so blessed every time he touches down in the United States. Can you talk about your experiences and the opportunity you felt here in America that you didn't even feel back in Britain?
Well, that's exactly how I feel as well. The energy, the sense of opportunity. I mean, for me growing up, the United States was kind of the beacon. It was a beacon of pretty much everything. Popular culture, that was a big deal. Back in the 80s when I was, kind of a teenager and going off into college. I mean, everything was really, in many respects, defined by America. And if you think from the European experience since World War I, when America came in and helped turn back the tide of World War I again, the second time in World War II, America's had a big impact in the United Kingdom and in Europe overall. And certainly for someone like myself coming from, a backwater, kind of remote part of the north of England where everyone had lost their jobs, the idea of coming to the United States and, eventually finding a job, Richard Haas giving me one of my first big jobs, I mean, that was an incredible opportunity that I would not have found at home.
Dr. Hill, it's Willie Geist. It's great to have you on the show this morning. Of all the stories and insights in the book, I'm perhaps most fascinated by your job as an NBC News stringer in 1988, which involved, I believe, styling Tom Brokaw's hair on the roof of a hotel in Russia.
And making coffee for Maria Shriver.
Oh, my God.
You did it all. You did it all.
Actually.
We can talk about, dig into some detail on that perhaps another time. But I'm interested in your thoughts as someone on the inside who really knows better than anybody about this question that hovered over the Trump administration for 4 years, which was, what did Vladimir Putin have on Donald Trump that made him so deferential to Vladimir Putin, that made him never want to cross him publicly or even privately, to have Donald Trump so enthralled with Vladimir Putin? And you've said, really, there's nothing specific. There's no tape, not a real estate deal, but just the fragility of his ego. Could you flesh that out a little bit? And was there anything that Putin had on Donald Trump?
Well, look, I think that's uppermost. It's the fragility of the ego. I mean, of course, we all know that President Trump wanted, as a businessman, and probably still does, to build a Trump Tower in Moscow, and spent a lot of time focused on that issue. And, of course, the Russians, as a matter of course, collect information on anyone who comes their way. Business person, politician, any prominent tourist. So you can be sure that they had something. But the biggest thing was the ability to manipulate, because what Vladimir Putin likes to do is find out what buttons he can push. People's vulnerabilities, and that's what he honed into in the case of President Trump.
We're looking at video as you speak, Dr. Hill, from Helsinki of President Trump and President Putin standing together. Our friend Jonathan Lemire asked point blank the question of Donald Trump. The world is watching right now. Will you criticize Vladimir Putin for interfering in the 2016 election? He infamously declined to do that. What was your reaction to that moment in Helsinki?
Well, I was actually sitting right in front of Jonathan, and Jonathan features in the book because I recount this episode. And, you know, for me, of course, this was just a nightmare, well, for everybody else watching it as well, because it was entirely predictable. But from the perspective of myself and others who were working in the NSC at the time, we knew that President Trump did not want to admit that the Russians had played any kind of role in the election, because it would be tantamount to saying that he hadn't been elected legitimately, that he was an illegitimate president. He didn't want to give any credence, you know, to that kind of idea. And he also didn't want to challenge Putin. Because for Putin, Putin is for him the ultimate strongman. It's the person he wants to be most like, and he wanted Putin to like him. The one question they actually asked me directly, in fact, the only real question I remember him asking me directly was, am I going to like him about Putin?
You mentioned the idea of challenge Putin. Does Vladimir Putin rule for as long as he wants to? And then what happens? He has so consolidated power, wealth, in his hands, those of his friends. What is Russia after Vladimir Putin? Has he forever changed it? Does it become more open, or is this now Russia for what you've looked at this country for decades? What do you think?
Well, it's Russia for the foreseeable future while we, you know, see Vladimir Putin in place. And of course, we've had all these revelations from the latest papers that investigative journalists have got hold of that show, you know, Putin stashing money away all over the place for various mistresses and, you know, other cronies. And we've got a kleptocratic system that's in place right now in Russia, so that will continue while Vladimir Putin is still in place. In theory, he'd like to stay till 2036, by which time he'll be well into his 80s, and he'll be the longest-serving modern Russian leader of any kind.
Hey, thanks so much for watching our YouTube channel. You can follow up on today's top stories and breaking news, or catch up on your favorite MSNBC shows all in one place. Download the NBC News app today.